My name is James Roberts and this is task 6. This is my review on my risk assessments for effectiveness. Okay, the first one I'm going to review is my session in the gym, which was doing bench press. My client was a 17-year-old girl. I had 2 spotters with me and I was the coach. It took place at Rivers Gym in Evesham, the leisure centre one. The equipment I had was the bench press bench and all that, and the Olympic bar, the weights and the clips for the actual bar. Okay, I'm going to go through some things now about it to see how effective it was. There were no accidents during the session and it went as planned because, I followed the risk assessment safety and, had all the clips and things to hand, had spotters. It was pretty well guarded so there wouldn't be accidents. There was one near miss where the client lost concentration though. On the pushing up bit they lost concentration and nearly tilted the bar to one side, but it was at a low weight and I was there at the time as well, so it wasn't that much of a near miss as a near slip. During the session I had an assessor with me and I got feedback. They believed that the session went well. They thought that I checked the safety features okay and that I had the right amount of guidance in place during the session to make sure no accidents happened. I also spoke to the client on how safe they felt during the session. They said, yeah, they thought they were okay. They trusted me to take the weight if anything happened, and they thought that the demonstration that they had prior to it was adequate, so they knew what they were doing. I thought that I might have needed to have gone a bit more in depth in the demonstration on the technique just to help them out so that it would prevent more of a chance of an accident happening. Control measures like abandoning and changing. I didn't plan to abandon. I already had a backup in place to change if the client wasn't willing or didn't want to do it. I'd already planned ahead on that. The changes I'd had were like changing what type of session it would be. Instead of doing free weight, for instance, going and doing a cardio session or something along those lines for the client. Because they did mention they had a sort of a dodgy shoulder before the session in the interview I did with them. So I'd planned to do possibly treadmill work and maybe a bit of resistance equipment just to build up their strength beforehand if they weren't willing or if they were in pain. That was my plan change, but there's also dynamic changes that take place, like if it's a busy gym on the day and I hadn't planned, I'd have chose to possibly change what I was doing from if there was a big queue of people wanting to use a bench press, I might have done leg press or something instead, for instance. That would have been the activity changes in the kit. It would have all been on organisation. I'd have had supervisors in place for it the whole time. I'm also qualified to do all of that, and I had some assessor with me that was also qualified to help out. The risk assessment's aims and objectives were to keep the client safe and make sure that the risks were more controlled during the session and I had a better idea of what they could be. Plan controls I had in place were having me there, making sure all safety features were in place, making sure I had spotters, gym instructors helping me, that sort of thing that I'd already planned, and you can see that in my risk assessments. Dynamic controls which I had to put in place were I had to drop the weight a couple of times on the bench press just to improve the technique because the client seemed to be struggling on it. And that's about it for my first risk assessment. So moving on to my second, which was football training and simulation of a game. I had 12 children aged 8 to 10, which I was looking after during this, and it was at the sports hall at Evesham Leisure Centre. Equipment that I had was goals, the football that they were playing with, and I also had medium-sized cones so that they could see where they were going, but not the flat ones or the massive ones. During this, there was one accident where at the start where I was coming in, the kids were messing around a bit before, and one kicked the ball a bit hard and it hit another in the face. I had it checked out and everything was fine afterwards though, and the kid was willing to participate and there was no bruising or damaging of any type. Near misses, After that, there was only like 1 or 2 near misses where maybe they got a bit close to playing with the wall, but during this time I blew my whistle and moved them away from it to control it. The assessor said to me at this point that they thought maybe I should have taken a bit more control at the start when they started playing around, but I hadn't, so I've learned to do that more in future. I also agree with that in my self-feedback on it. Talking to the parents of the children afterwards, though, they felt it went well and that, well, they know that it's always a liability with children playing because they tend to act up and get a bit over-enthusiastic and tired a bit easy, so it's not too unexpected for them and no damage was done, so that's okay. Controls. I hadn't planned to abandon it because if there wasn't the right numbers or anything like that, I was just going to train them or do something different. I was just going to change it, like, say, instead of 12 people, I got 8. I wouldn't have enough to do a match, really, but I'd be able to do something like Mexican penalty shootout or that type of thing. I'd already planned ahead for that, got a spare session in place. Or I could have changed it dynamically and just done like Wembley or something like that if I had felt like it, or if they were bored of penalties, etc. That would be the activity. If I didn't have the correct kit, like if I didn't have the goal or it was broken, I could always just put cones out if I'd needed to change that type of thing. If there were too many kids and like that turned up, I could always ask one of the parents to help keep them away from the wall, like help me supervise a bit. And also I had a assessor with me who was qualified to help out with this and coach it. The risk assessment's aims were to keep the children safe during the session and keep the parents away and make sure everything was properly assessed so I knew what to expect if something went wrong. So I think they were quite suitable for what I'd actually done and what was going to happen in the session. The controls I had in place that were planned were good enough because I'd planned in case of an emergency what to change. I had an idea so there wouldn't be like a massive gap in between, so that the session would keep flowing and that they'd feel like they had a fair amount done. The dynamic controls that were needed, I didn't have to do any, but I could have thought of something if I'd needed it just to change it to keep it interesting. And that's about it. I feel like my aims and objectives were suitable for both risk assessments and they were planned and went well, and that is the end of my review.